Daitsū Tom Wright here this evening speaking with us. And we'll have a few questions for him and his association with Uchiyama Rōshi. Uchiyama Rōshi was Kodo Sawaki student, and Okumura Rōshi, one of my teachers, was also Uchiyama's student. And Daitsū Tom, you and Okumura had a lot of translation projects together, I know. And that's maybe one thing you'd like to talk about. I don't think I brought it up exactly in the interview guide. But the first question I wanted to ask you, everybody's always curious, what is the meaning of your Dharma name, Daitsu?
It may not be appropriate, but the meaning is big communicator. I'm afraid I'm not a very good communicator, but that's the name that I received from Uchiyama Rōshi.
Okay. I thought maybe it was a great boy named Tsu.
Works for me.
Right. So does anybody have a question they would like to ask before we begin the interview? Anybody online? Zenku has done some research and
you know, I have many questions to bring up, but I think that why don't we go ahead with the dialogue that you had in mind, Roshi, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good?
Yep. And then Tisha and Jim Smith is also on tonight. He's also done some research. All three of us have been featuring your book, Deepest Practice, Deepest Wisdom. I featured that. I'm featuring that now on our Tuesday night Cloud Dharma dialogue not every Tuesday night, 3 Tuesdays out of the month. And Zenku started out with the teachings of Homeless Kodo. Then Tesha and Jim Smith did a series on comparative teachings between Uchiyama, Matsuoka Rōshi, and some of my teachings. So we're featuring your lineage this year as in honor of our blended Dharma family. And in November, we go into Founders Month. Matsuoka Rōshi was born and died in November. So next month, we will be chanting his Butsurai. We've been chanting the Sawaki Uchiyama Butsurai through this week. The first question is a typical kind of question for this type of interview. I'd like to ask you to think back to your first encounter with Zen, where you were at that time, what you were doing, and how did it happen?
Well, what led up to my initial meeting with Kawamura Koyu Roshi in Sapporo, Hokkaido, was that prior to going to Japan, or actually fleeing to Japan to escape the Vietnam War, I was in Chicago for 1 year, working in the Inner City Peace Corps. It was a program similar to the one that Barack Obama was a part of. We knew some people who helped Barack Obama actually go to law school. But anyway, while I was in Chicago, this was in 1965, some pretty ugly things took place in Selma, Alabama. And I decided to go down there. And I was in Selma with Dr. King and Jim Bevel, other civil rights activists, and I was shot there. And fortunately, I have a very hard head, but fortunately escaped okay. And after that, I transferred from Valparaiso University, where I had spent 2 years, and I transferred to American University out in Washington, D.C. By the time I got to Washington, D.C., I started getting involved in the anti-war movement. And I went to Japan as a lay missionary of one of the one of the Lutheran denominations. Not that I ever missionized. I really wasn't interested in missionizing as I was in escaping that war. And while I was in Sapporo, a Japanese friend asked me if I would be interested in going to looking at a Zen temple. And I said, yeah, that sounds interesting. So he took me, and that's where I met Kawamura Koyu Roshi, who later was, I think he was the Godo at Eiheiji for 2-3 years, I believe.
Can you explain that term, his office?
Godo is like the head monk in charge of the monks in the monastery. He was asked to do that for a couple of years. But when I met him, this was before he went to Eiheiji, he said, would you like to do Zazen? I said, za what? And he said, sitting. He didn't use the word meditation, but he said, I'll show you. So he took me in the room and sat me down. And my first sitting was about 10 minutes. And I thought I was going to die. I had one knee got to the floor. The other knee was probably closer to my right ear than it was to the floor. I was a pretty stiff person. So
you were pretty young at the time, too.
Yeah, I was what, 21, I guess. And in any event, I liked it, and I started sitting at the house of the host family I was staying at every morning, and I'd get up about 6 in the morning every morning. I was sitting for about 20 minutes. And that was really the beginning of my sitting. It took me until I was about 35 until I was able to sit a whole sesshin in full lotus. It took me many, many years.
Well, that's interesting. Did you have any? Had you read anything about meditation or Zazen? Do you have any inkling of what it was about?
Before going to Japan, I think Alan Watts, in that day, Ginsberg, I was reading, people basically in the Bay Area. I was reading those books, but that's about it, really. Oh, and then when I got to Japan, there was one book that was very famous at that time, Kaplo's book.
Yes, Three Pillars.
That Three Pillars, yeah, which I subsequently thought was just a terrible book, but that's just me.
What did you not like about it, out of curiosity?
I think it was trying to push people to get enlightened, and that was not what I was hearing from Kawamura Roshi and ultimately from Uchiyama Roshi.
Right.
We were not sitting to get enlightened.
Isn't it true that the teacher that Kaplo was working with, and Kaplo was a court recorder, so he was allowed to. I thought the most interesting part of the book was where he was allowed to record the Dokusan dialogues, because you could kind of read between the lines and kind of get an idea of what was going on. But wasn't that teacher Renzai? Do I recall correctly?
Yeah, it might have been Yasutani Hakuin, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was Renzai. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I believe so.
So I think that's the natural at least my understanding for Matsuoka Roshi is talks about Rinzai versus Soto. That's a natural part of Rinzai is to be more driven, you know. But he always felt Americans were driven enough. We don't need to be more driven.
Good point. Good point.
We may have come close to crossing paths in Chicago. I went there 1959 to go to the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech, so-called New Bauhaus. That's where I did my undergraduate and graduate work.
Oh, okay.
In design. So I was in Chicago until 1970 when I moved to Atlanta. Matsuoka Roshi moved to Long Beach from Chicago. My wife is born and raised in Chicago, so we have a strong connection with Chicago.
Oh.
I was there during the police riots, 1968 convention.
Yeah.
Lincoln Park, carrying my son around on my shoulders.
Is that right? Yeah. Wow. Those were heady days.
So you were in your early 20s. I asked you what you were doing, and you were very active. But were you formerly a student? Do you have a job? Did you have a job? Were you a reporter? Were you a journalist or anything like that, professionally speaking?
No. I, to be honest with you, I didn't want to work.
Welcome to the club.
I was not really into getting a job, but it was not difficult in those days to teach English privately and support oneself. And that's how I did it. I had a number of private English teaching jobs, and that supported me.
You mean in Japan or Chicago? You mean in Japan or Chicago?
This was in Japan.
Yeah.
In Japan. So I was still a student while I was in the States.
Yeah.
I did work part-time.
Not too personal question. How could you afford to travel to Japan at 21 years old?
The Lutheran Church sent me. They paid for the airfare there and sent me up to Hokkaido. So I didn't pay for anything.
How have you done it? What was the mission?
The mission was to missionize and spread Lutheranism around Hokkaido.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, that's too. I'll be darned.
First girlfriend in high school was daughter of the Lutheran minister of the New Lutheran Church in my hometown, Southern Illinois, small town. So, okay. Anybody have any questions on that? If you would like to ask Daitsū Tom.
Nothing here.
Come up for anybody. I see Zinku.
Yeah, no, again, hello, and thank you for your remarks already. You know, I'm from Illinois, and I too, I think we're a pretty similar vintage, and so I too was worried about the draft and did whatever I could to avoid going to the Vietnam War. But I was not. You were ahead of me. I never conceived of going to Japan. That ultimately led to you becoming interested in Zen practice and Zen teaching. I was just beginning my Zen training, you know, my interest in Zen like around the late 60s. But I'm curious, how did it evolve that you went to Japan, and I know you have an interest. Was it a very, very slow progression and you got more serious and got more involved with teachers? Or was there a specific moment that when you met Uchiyama Rōshi, or how did that go? I'm curious about that part.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Okumura Rōshi had just read through How to Cook Your Life, Jinsei Ryori no Hon in Japanese, How to Cook Your Life. And he's in that book, he found out that Uchiyama Roshi was living in Kyoto and at Antaiji, and that non-Japanese people were invited to sit there as well. So he sent me down to Kyoto. I hitchhiked down there because I didn't have any money. In fact, I hitchhiked all over Japan up and down Japan maybe 4 or 5 times in my early mid-20s. I really liked hitchhiking because it also, not because I didn't have any money, which was true, but I got to meet a lot of Japanese that way, and it was a good opportunity to talk with people and to work with my Japanese. One fellow even picked me up on the way to Tokyo, and he was telling me his story, and he used the word korosu, and I had my dictionary, korosu, kill. He had killed someone, and he was a gang member of one of the Yakuza, and was telling me about someone near Tokyo that he had taken out. His boss told him to take him out. He was telling this to me. I don't know why. I figured he probably figured I was no one anyway, so that was okay. But I finally got to Kyoto, and I went to see Uchiyama Roshi for the first time. And he said, well, sesshin starts tomorrow. This was December so 31st for 30th, 31st, yeah. So I got there about the 29th, and he said, tomorrow sesshin begins. Why don't you sit with us? I said, oh, I'd like to do that. Boy, was that a mistake. I got there, and for the first 3 days, I was just in incredible pain. As you know, the sittings at Antaiji were 50 minutes, not 40 minutes or 30 minutes, 50 minutes. And we were sitting 14 hours a day. So up at 4 and to bed around 9. And after the third day, I was just completely exhausted. The next morning on the 4th day, the senior monk came and took one look at me, and he says, don't get up, stay in bed. So the 4th day I spent mostly in bed. I sat later in the afternoon, the evening, but that was all. And we finished on the 5th day. And when I left Antaiji that day, I said, one thing I know for sure, I'm never coming here again. That was so let's see, that was 67, 60, 69. And that session turns out to be the first session that Shōhaku-san also sat. We were sitting in the same session. He was still a student at Komazawa University, and Uchiyama Roshi advised him to finish at Komazawa first and then come to Antaiji, which he did, of course. And so that was my first meeting with Shōhaku-san as well.
Shōhaku invited me, or required really, that I come to Sanshinji in Bloomington for 3 retreats, one a Genzo-e, one a Sangha retreat, and one a Taiji style, no nonsense retreat. And the 50-10, 50-10 all day long. It's amazing what happens to you by 9 o'clock that night. I wasn't exactly trying to avoid the draft. I was married at the time, and I thought I was going to go. I thought my number was going to come up. And I was exempted for being married, the Kennedy administration, and I was exempted for having a child, or for being a student first, we had a student exemption at one time, and then there was an exemption for being married, and there was an exemption for having a child. My first wife was pregnant, so I was exempted 3 times. I never did go to it, but I wasn't trying to avoid it. I thought I was probably going to go. Glad I got.
When I got to Japan, the local draft board drafted me, told me I had to go to the local base in Chitose in Hokkaido for a health exam. And I took the letter that I got from the draft board and I lit it on fire and took the ashes and I put them in a return letter saying, I'm not interested in this one. Please let me know when you have another good war. Well, they didn't like that. And so that took quite a while to get a reply from them. And I thought the next letter I got from them, now my goose is cooked. But what happened was a friend told me that you can appeal at the state level. So the next thing I did was I appealed at the state level and they turned me down 4-0. And then I thought, okay, now I have no other alternatives. But he said, there's one more. You can do what's called a presidential appeal. And by that time, Nixon was out and Jerry Ford had become president and I was exempted.
Oh, I'm done. That's great.
The boards had turned me down because I was a Lutheran. They said, Lutherans aren't conscientious objectors. They're always willing to fight wars.
Luther didn't Luther start a war in a sense?
Yeah.
Okay, question number 2, if that's all for that one. What was the situation, including the nature of your engagement of Zen, when you traveled to Japan, first met Uchiyama Rōshi? You relate some of this in Deepest Practice, Deepest Wisdom, which I featured this year in our Tuesday evening Cloud Dharma book group. But please tell us anything of interest that may have been left out of that published account. You just told us a couple of things. Anything else that stands out in your mind?
Well, as
the
you
language
know,
is something I always wonder about. How the hell did you learn Japanese?
That's a good question. The one good thing that the missionaries did for me was they sent me to language school. And there were 4 students and 1 teacher, very small classes, and it was so almost individual teaching. I was studying in Hokkaido, I was studying Japanese probably about 8 hours a day with teachers and then listening to tapes. And over 2 years, I began to pick up enough to get by. And one of the teachers I kind of had a hankering for, and she began teaching me at home as well as at the school. And eventually we got together and we married.
I'll be done.
So I married my Japanese teacher. Are you kidding? Every day she's telling me, no, that's not right. You don't say it that way. You should say it this way or that way. She's constantly, she's my forever teacher. I don't know.
Yeah. My wife is a great teacher too, but it's not about language. Sensei gave us a long, like a legal size sheet with a lot of Japanese terms, like shichirei shimashita, sumimasen, ohayo gozaimasu and stuff, so we could be polite, when the Japanese would come for holidays. They didn't regularly come to sit, but they would show up around funerals and holidays and things of that nature. And I've often thought of Japanese, the Asian languages, as like from another planet, and the English type languages are so very different. But when I was in Japan, first time I began to start recognizing symbols like bridge, that I'm trained visually. I'm visually oriented as a designer, and so I think I started recognizing the language just in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I started to sort of, see things that I could remember. I've always admired people. Would you say you're bilingual? Do you think in Japanese?
My wife is upstairs right now. You'd be better to ask her than me, but most of my daily life, since maybe the mid-70s, more in Japanese than in English.
I'll be done.
Yeah. Reading, this is part of my library behind me, here and over there. I've got a 15-volume dictionary that's something like the Japanese OED, I suppose, that I have to use all the time. So I'm constantly learning, even now.
Which was the more difficult, the spoken part or the written part?
Written, definitely. I suppose an educated Japanese will use maybe 2,000, 3,000, possibly 3,500 Chinese characters. I can probably read about 4,000 or 5,000. A Chinese person might know maybe 8,000 or 9,000 of the 61,000 kanji that exist.
Wow. Shōhaku Okumura was here one time. He was giving a talk, and he said, "I'm speaking slowly because I'm thinking in Japanese and speaking in English, and so I have to translate as I go." And I've always thought it would be a wonderful thing to be bilingual because it would change the way you think, or the way you're able to think.
I'm sure it does affect me in ways that I myself don't even know.
You feel like the Japanese language uses a different part of the brain than the English?
Wow. Maybe they use more of the pictorial part of our brain.
Yeah.
I think someone has a question.
It's related to this. Do you dream in Japanese?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It uses a different part of the brain.
Is that right?
Dreaming. Mm-hmm.
I don't write it. Reading I can, of course, and I translate, of course. But writing is a whole nother thing.
Wow. Red Skelton used to say, I can write reading, but I can't read writing. Okay, moving right along. And if not already covered, tell us more about how your sojourn in Japan came to an end. What brought you back to America? How you reestablished your Zen practice?
I have lived most of my adult life in Japan, actually. I lived there for 43 years. In the early days, as I said previously, I was very much connected with Antaiji, but as my child got older, I realized I would have to have a little bit more income if I was going to put him through school. So I had an opportunity to teach at a university in Japan called Ryukoku University. It's a Buddhist university in Kyoto, connected with the Nishihon Ganji sect of Buddhism. And I taught there for about 35 years. At first, just part-time, because that was all I needed. And then they asked me if I would come on staff full-time. And so I became tenured there. And so I retired when I was 65. I could have continued teaching, but I had enough teaching, and I wanted to do something else. And one of the people who was instrumental in my sitting at Antaiji, his name was Fred Stober, was living in Hawaii, and he said, well, why don't you come to Hawaii? And I came to visit him a couple times, and I liked it very much. And he said to me, oh, well, just down the hill there, that next property next door there is open. There's no one there, and it's up for sale. So I after going back to Japan and talking with my wife, I decided that going to Hawaii would be a good thing. And Robert Aiken Roshi was still alive, and Fred was sitting with him. So I decided that, okay, I'm going to come to Hawaii when I retire. And surprisingly, a friend found an old house that they were going to destroy. And my friend said, well, why don't you go down and get that house? So I went down, talked to the guy who was going to tear it down. He says, oh yeah, you can take it $15,000 for the house.
Wow. Wow.
So we got a hauler from Honolulu to come over, and they cut this house in half, put it on two trailers, and brought it up to the property that I'm living at now, put it back together, put the roof back on. And so I was able to do this for very little money.
Wow.
And that's what I've been doing since.
So how did you reestablish your Zen practice once you had settled?
Right. I was sitting with Fred, and Fred passed away shortly after I got here. And we found a place. Actually, it was Fred's wife who said, well, why don't you use part of our house for a Zendo? So that's where I started one group on Sundays to sit with. They came every week, and I would give Dharma talks, and we would sit for 2 periods and have talk and discussion. And then another group, the Alaneo Zendo folks, asked me to come there as a teacher. So I started sitting with them, and they sit twice a week. So now I'm sitting 3 times a week with these two groups. And my practice has continued in that way.
Tell us a little bit about your formal training and credentialing and so forth. Before this, you must have been ordained or something through Uchiyama.
Yes, I was ordained in 1974 by Uchiyama Rōshi, and I'm sure you're familiar with you have 3 steps. First you ordain, then you spend, depending upon your educational background, so much time in a monastery in Japan, and then you receive eventually transmission from your teacher. Well, after I was ordained in 74, it took me a while before I was able to leave home for a whole year to spend in a monastery. But I think I guess I was about 45 when I went to Myokoji in Kyushu. This is one of the 16 district monasteries in Japan, 16 official monasteries. And I spent a year there. And so that was the second step. And then in 1998, before I went on sabbatical leave to Poland from the university, I received transmission from Uchiyama Rōshi was no longer able to do it. He was already not well. All through the 70s, 80s, he was not well. 5-6 months, he was usually in bed. So I received transmission from Takamine Dōyū Rōshi, who still lives there in Japan today. And so that was 1998 that I became an official teacher.
Okay, thank you for that. So, now, what would you say are the main? Let me ask if anybody has a question first before we move on a little bit. Another item.
Yeah, I just had one question. You know, I was curious as to the story when you first went to your first sesshin and you had such a great time. I'm just kidding. But how did you go from that to now actually getting into what drew you back to, what was the appeal that drew you back to Zazen?
After that first session, I returned to Hokkaido and I continued sitting, but not doing sessions. But I really did sitting became like the core of my life, I guess you'd have to say. And I wanted to continue sitting. Also, winter became spring and summer, and I finished my time with the missionaries, and so I decided I wanted to go to India. But before I go to India, I'll go back to Antaiji to see Uchiyama Rōshi, because I did like him, and he was extremely cordial. So I hitchhiked down to Antaiji again, and I decided, well, maybe I'll put off going to India for a while and just stay here in Kyoto. And I wound up staying there 30 years, 35 years in Kyoto.
There are a couple of stories in the Zen history like that, where people get sort of sucked into the vortex. I had a similar experience in teaching. I was very young. I was in my mid-20s when I was doing my graduate work, and I was hired to teach at the University of Illinois Chicago Circle campus when they first formed in their architecture and design department. And then I was recruited to teach at the Art Institute, School of the Art Institute. So I was teaching in both of them at the same time. But my first marriage was falling apart, and a lot of things were happening. And I was working with a research firm on the outside who was moving to Atlanta. So that's where I decided I wanted to go out in the real world and do something other than, be in the academic community. So very similar kind of disenchantment with, so much academia.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on. What would you say, in your opinion or your viewpoint, are the main societal and cultural differences in Zen as you practiced and witnessed it in Japan, and the nature of its transference to the United States at that time? We could talk about the future later, but what did you see when you came back, and how did you picture and envision Zen in Hawaii compared to, say, Zen back in Japan?
I I guess I'd have to say that I didn't really have any idea how this was going to play out, to be honest with you. All I knew is that I wanted to continue to sit and to continue to translate and work on Uchiyama Rōshi's books. And that was really the stimulus for me to be here. Yeah. Cultural differences. Well, Hawaii is definitely not Japan. There, Hawaii is a very complex place. What the United States as a country did to the Hawaiian people was outrageous. I think Americans need to know more about the historical background of Hawaii to understand that. And so I, as a white guy, don't fit into every circle here in Hawaii. I'm not necessarily invited, and it's totally understandable.
Is that similar to Japan and Gaijin?
Well, the difference for me was, yeah, in Japan too, I was set apart because I don't look Japanese and I'm not Japanese. But most of the discrimination was in my favor, not against me, but it was in my favor in almost every case. I think all of the years I was in Japan, I can think of just one time when I was in like a B&B in northern Japan, not in Hokkaido, I was on Honshu, and I went to have dinner in the dining hall, and the cook took one look at me and said, "Oh, I don't serve Americans." And so I left, and the lady who ran the B&B said, "Well, did you enjoy dinner?" And I said, "No, I didn't, because he wouldn't serve me." And she was so pissed off that she took me by the hand. We went back into the dining room, and she made him give me dinner. That's the only time I can remember of being actually discriminated against.
Yeah.
You know,
There was a similar incident in 1989. We were out in a rather remote village looking through used or sort of flea market type things. And there was a group of people who were from the area, and they started yelling something at us in Japanese. And our escort took us away. They said they were ignorant people or something. So because we were obviously American, they probably had something negative to say. But that was the only time. I assume you were recognized as a Gaijin talento.
Well, I was on NHK for that, for being an American priest in Japan, actually.
1989, when we were there, we had a expatriate from America who had moved there, who had been a friend of a gentleman, psychiatrist I was traveling with. And he had married Japanese, had Japanese children. He had trained in one of the pottery arts, the one that has the white porcelain with the blue decorations, very famous.
Yeah.
And he was so good at it that his master finally kicked him out of the studio because he didn't have anything else to teach him. And he also was very erudite in Japanese. And he talked to what kind of problems that caused sometimes when people would come up and say something to him and sort of like baby Japanese, and he would respond in a very erudite way, and it pissed them off. They didn't like it because he was too penetrating the culture too much. So he said he had to learn to be funny and make people laugh. So he started showing us one thing he did. He would do Japanese with an East Indian accent.
Oh.
It's the funniest thing you ever heard. I couldn't begin to. And people would break up hysterically. And that's the way he broke the ice with people.
I met a lot of people also when I went out on takuhatsu. I went for about 10 years after I left Antaiji. I still went out on takuhatsu, and that's mendicant begging.
I'll be darned.
I met a lot of different people in Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto, and I never experienced any problems, and almost always people were putting money in my bowl.
Would you think your attire as a monk bridged the gap somehow, even though you were still obviously an American or Western?
Yeah, I do remember one place that I was doing takuhatsu, and the child, there was maybe a 5-year-old child came outside, and she said, "Gaijin Bozu, Gaijin Bozu." And the woman of the house came out and looked at me, and she lifted my hat. "Oh, yeah, Gaijin Bozu," meaning a foreign monk. And I went on, and then I turned around and I told her, I'm sorry, but there's no such thing as Gaijin Bozu. There's only Bozu. And it took her aback. She was surprised that I would say that to her in Japanese.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I just think Matsuoka Ryoki would often say Zen is dead in Japan. And many of the people, early people who came over, I think, felt the same way. That it would find its rebirth in America was his point, and that Soto Zen is what he recommended over Rinzai or any of the other form, because we're already stressed enough, and Soto is so simple. Okay, anybody else have a question or comment before we move on? Yoji, you have anything?
Yeah, Hushin has a question.
We have one in the room here. Let Len.
Where was your favorite place to hitchhike in Japan?
I'm sorry.
Where was your favorite place to hitchhike in Japan?
Oh, to hitchhike.
Yeah.
This is a young man who might follow in your footsteps.
Where is my favorite place? I enjoyed very much going from Tokyo area up to Hokkaido. One reason for that is a lot of trucks would pick me up. And the truck drivers were really interesting to talk to. I was actually, maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but one time I was hitchhiking with my wife, and a truck picked us up and took us, was going to take us all the way up to Aomori from Tokyo. That's several hours. So he says to me, "Oh, there's a space behind here. You can go up there and you can sleep." So I climbed up behind there and I laid down, and my wife sat with the guy, and I could see that he was talking to her almost the whole time up there. When we got to Aomori and we're on the ferry boat to go over to Hokkaido, I asked her, "Well, that guy was talking all night. What was he saying to you?" She said, "He was telling me dirty jokes." Hours and hours of dirty jokes. So she never hitchhiked with me again.
All right, Matsuoka Rōshi chose to come to America in 1940, the year I was conceived, at the behest of Sotoshu Kumucho. He said his mother told him to go die in America. Uchiyama Rōshi chose to stay in Japan instead. Can you speak to that difference in these two Dharma brothers? They were actually Dharma brothers. They were both born in 1912. And what may have conditioned their thinking?
Well, one reason that Uchiyama never left Japan is because he said he was afraid of flying. He didn't want to go on any airplanes. That was one thing. The other thing was he didn't speak any English. All the years that I saw Uchiyama Rōshi, which was from 74 to 98, I never spoke to him in English, even one time. He knew English, some English words, but he says even in his books that he doesn't speak English. And he thought it was important because he thought, as I think as probably Matsuoka Rōshi too, thought Buddhism in Japan was dying. And so it was important to have people, at least when Uchiyama Rōshi was alive and sitting, to have people sitting. And he emphasized that over the years.
Well, we understand that it had died out, and Kodo Sawaki revived Zazen and Soto Zen. And Uchiyama makes a comment about that it was actually kind of sustained in Rinzai Zen along with koan practice, but it kind of died out in Zazen temples.
Yeah, I think over the years,
Soto temples.
Yeah, I think what happened is that, okay, for one thing, in order to have a temple in Japan, you need to have about at least 150 parishioners to survive. And there are right now something like 8,000 empty temples.
Right. And Soto?
So just in Sotoshu, I think they're probably close to that. There aren't enough priests to fill all the temples, and a lot of them are just empty. In fact, a few years ago, well, more than that, maybe 20 years ago, when I was still in Japan, they were advertising that you could buy a temple as long as you to take over and take care of the building. I don't know if that's still going on, but it could be.
Wow. Yeah, we heard stories that they were the funeral temples. And they made their income from funerals and things like that. I even saw a TV special where a bunch of monks were doing a fashion show with ukesas, all different kinds of ukesas and things, trying to attract young people, find some way to attract young people.
Yeah.
But what would it be in your mind would be the difference in worldview or something of that nature that would two Japanese men in their 20s, mid-20s, one would come to America and one would not. And you've explained about Uchiyama and his decision. It makes sense that because it's dying out in Japan, I want to stay and make sure it doesn't. And keep Kodo Sawaki tradition alive, the Dogen tradition alive. But how would you? I think I sent you Matsuoka Roshi's books, but I assume you're not very familiar with him.
Yeah.
How would you profile his decision to come to America in contrast to Uchiyama Roshi's? We understand he was asked by Sotoshu to come to America. It wasn't a total decision. but he also assiduously studied English for year after year after year, long before he came to America. So he must have been preparing.
Uchiyama Rōshi talk about the Japanese priests who were being sent to the United States, and then, of course, in the late 60s, early 70s, there were many problems with teachers sleeping with students, and a number of things, hanky-panky going on, that Uchiyama Rōshi thought was just awful.
That did not include Matsuoka, by the way. He claimed to be a virgin at the end of his life, but he said he regretted it because he didn't have anybody to take care of him.
Actually, I didn't know about Matsuoka Rōshi until you turned me on to him, and now I'm going to be going over his talks too.
There's a couple of chapters in there. You'll notice Zen can bridge east and west, and he was known as a peacemaker, bridge builder. He always promoted Japan to America. He always promoted America to Japan before and after the war. And so I think part of his reason for coming was as a missionary, going as a missionary to the enemy, or to who would become the enemy shortly.
Well, I think Uchiyama Rōshi wanted someone to come to the States, and Shōhaku-san was really a good person to do that. He's, of course, he spoke English, and studied English before he came, and was I think the most in line with among Uchiyama Rōshi's. I think he had 27. He ordained about 27, 28 people, and Shōhaku-san was really right on top there. And then when Shōhaku was invited to Indiana by John McRae, everything just went in that direction, and that was really good, both for Shōhaku-san and I think also for America.
So in a sense, Uchiyama sent Shōhaku-san to America as a missionary.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, twice, because the first time Shōhaku went, he came back because he had injured his neck in Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts. The first temple that he was.
And he had some sort of back injury at one point.
Yes.
Okay, let's stop again. And Zinku has done some research, along with several of us doing research. We went in 2015 to Japan, did some video documentary on Matsuoka, and we're hoping to get that documentary, doing post-production now. I'm hoping to get it produced within the coming year, which will mark Matsuoka's 85th anniversary of coming to, or 45th, 2025. He came over in 1940, so whatever that anniversary is. But we came across a lot of interesting things, including an FBI interview of him. They thought that many of the priests coming over were spies in disguise at the time. Zinku, do you have anything to add to that around the research we've been doing, our Tessen? History of Matsuoka coming to America?
Yeah, no, we certainly did, and I'll let Tessen speak to that, since Tessen, did you want to say something about that?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. By the way, it's so much, Sensei, for all of your the stories about Uchiyama and all of your Dharma journey. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think with Matsuoka Roshi, what is so striking is that he did not seem to have, a clear plan sort of laid out, or whatever he was originally planned on. Everything changed because almost right after he got to the U.S., then Pearl Harbor and the war. But yeah, there's just one story I'd like to tell, and folks here I think have heard this before, so I'm sorry to burden you. But so he stayed in California area, also some in Colorado, but always had wanted to form a temple. That was his main reason. That was his objective for teaching Zazen, teaching Zen to Westerners. And he had an opening somehow here in Chicago. I'm in Chicago. And in 1943, he drove across country alone, several thousand miles.
Wow.
At the height of the war. And there were no interstates, right? You had to go little 2-lane highways, through the heartland of the country. And to him, this was what he needed to do, with, just utterly courageous, utterly fearless. And you'll find in his...
He wasn't discriminated against?
I think he must have been, but we never heard anything from him about that, from him directly. But we can certainly infer it as we, have done this research. But you'll see in his writings, this, Zen man is, always go forward, whether it's life or death, we keep on going, and just unshakable faith in Zazen.
I thought my
Zenku-san or Takamine Roshi, and please embellish as you see fit.
I thought my Zen life was. Oh, go ahead. Someone was.
No, I think you're on. Yeah.
Please go ahead. That's it.
I guess for me, Zazen has taken me through my life, my adult life at least. And I certainly hope that when I'm able to see the Zendo you have there, and this has come out of from Indiana and now in North Carolina. It's pretty obvious that that genuine Soto Zen is taking root in the United States. It's not easy. It's not easy, and it's a lifetime effort. I thought my sitting would be over when I was no longer able to fold my legs, which now I can't. I sit in a chair. I can no longer sit full lotus. I was fine until I hit maybe 60, 65. And after that, my legs really just haven't held up. So, but I have continued to sit in a chair, and I would also like to encourage those. We're living in an aging society, and not everyone until they're not everyone who is sitting will be able to sit with folded legs until they're 70 or 80 or 90. So I can only encourage you to continue to sit in whatever way you can, and carry that on as best you can. And if that happens, I think Zen will take more deeper roots in American culture, will affect American culture.
So I understand Okumura Rōshi told me he had to stop sitting lotus style when about 65, and Uchiyama also had to. I said, well, do you think maybe in Japan they overdo it, you know, at an early age, which really doesn't show up until later? I'm in my 80s now. I can still sit cross-legged, but I don't sit full lotus. I sit, you know, Burmese style or tuck Native American style. But I'm very, very careful about my knees and legs and always have been. But I don't overdo it. And he said he thought they did. He thought that was maybe part of it, a little too much zealotry or something. So interestingly, those were all about the same age, 65. And as I said, Matsuoka, Dogen, when I met Matsuoka, we were all in our mid-20s. Something around the mid-20s seems to be, especially for men. It may be different for women because they mature more quickly. But it seems to be that, you know, Buddha left home around 26, had his profound awakening 33, and Dogen was in his mid-20s when he went to China. Matsuoka was in his mid-20s when he came here. I was in my mid-20s when I met him in Chicago and so forth. Seems to be a pattern there. And I put Matsuoka in the same class as Bodhidharma or Dogen. They took the practice to a whole other country and a whole other culture. When you read his books, I think you will find that he's not only translating in terms of language, but he's translating in terms of culture.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry. Please.
Just use the word culture.
Sangha.
Uchiyama Rōshi, when asked about what is religion, it's what Zazen is sitting the highest culture. Sitting itself is taking care of and exemplifying the highest form of culture.
The most refined.
Most refined, yes. Like refining.
It's interesting. Buddha used that same term, or at least the translator chose it. But he was talking about being jaded. He was so refined that he didn't want anything in his early Sybaritic lifestyle. You know, when he left and went on the road, and then he became an ascetic. But he said he was so refined. He used the same English term, or the translator did, but totally different meaning.
Yeah.
Like jaded.
There's a couple of questions online.
Okay, good. We don't have the gallery view up, so please call them out, Zinku.
Sangha is wanting to see.
Sangha.
Thank you
for sharing with us this evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You are unique to me in that I have a chance to ask you this question. You said Zazen was the core of your life, yet you are also a translator. And you're unique in terms of a person I've heard speak who's American, translating Japanese who lived in Japanese for a long time and now have come back. But I see many translations that are German and Japanese working. I just wonder how that has affected your Zazen and how your Zazen has affected your translation. Is that a worthy enough question?
Yes. I was thinking just a little bit about where did I put it? Deepest practice, deepest wisdom. I'm still reading it. I'm still learning from it. Even though I may have translated it, and Shōhaku-san was also involved with that, I'm still learning from it. Lots of things go on in our lives from day to day. And so there's no end to our practice and no end to our learning. Learning is forever, and practice is forever. And our practice is learning how to be with this universe that we actually are. We are not a part of the universe. We are the universe. This is the universe. And every day, for example, I know some people think I'm nuts, but I go out every day and I talk to my trees. I ask them what they need. I see what they're doing. I shake their hands, their leaves, and they have blessed me. And I've already told my wife that when I die in the next year or two, it won't be too long, I'm sure. I want the ashes spread around those trees to give back what they have continually been giving to me. How we learn to live our lives as the universe is a lifetime. It's a lifetime gift.
Very interesting. There's some form of burial now becoming popular where they wrap you in some kind of organic plant matter and plant you under a tree so that your body deteriorating feeds the tree directly. I can't remember what it's called. Do you remember what that is? Something? I came across something interesting. You know, we have all this modern science, and it gets to be a little distracting for people in Zen practice, I think, dealing with the convergence or the correlations between science and our practice. But one I came across recently, the person said, human consciousness is the unified field. Interesting way to put it. So finally, we would love to hear your vision of the future of Zen in America, perhaps by extension in the rest of the world. What are your hopes and any fears that you may harbor in that regard?
I guess both my hope, my vision, and hope is that we can all become increasingly aware of our connection to everything around us. I think that is one thing that our Zazen, one of the gifts that Zazen gives to us, that we are connected to everything. And that means as human beings, which we haven't done such a good job of in this, definitely in the last few hundred years, our polluting of the planet, we need to my hope is that we can learn to take better care of the planet, which means taking care of ourselves. Taking care of ourselves is taking care of the planet, taking care of what's around us, and not separating ourselves from everything that is around us, but seeing that it's all of us. It's all of our greater body. And I hope that my vision is, our hope is that that you can continue your sitting as long as possible.
Okumura Roshi said something similar to the quote from physics. He said, we are the universe, human race, all sentient beings really, but mainly the human race, universe becoming conscious of itself. But he also, at another time, he said, I'm afraid that we may be like a cancer and killing off our host's ability to support us.
Yes, I do believe that we are doing that. In the last session that I did in North Carolina with Josho Phelan and her group, I think one of the things that I emphasized was going deeper and deeper into seeing the connections that we have with everything around us, and how important it is. Taking care of the things that are around us is taking care of ourselves. So a Zen life is a gift. It's some people might think that Zen people are always have dour faces and they can't laugh and appreciate anything. I hope that isn't true.
I think there's probably a puritanistic streak in American Zen, but hopefully it will fade out. So is there anything else that we did not talk about today that you would like to bring up? Do you have any questions for myself or other members of our blended Dharma family community that you've met online here for the first time?
My question would be to anyone who wants to respond to it would be, how do you understand your own practice? How do you see your practice? And what is Zazen in your life? That would be my question. I see everyone wants to answer.
I could tell, yeah.
Let's take a shot at that. This is Zenku again. What you have said, your experience and mine have been quite different in terms of geography and culture influences, but we've both kind of gone on a Zen path, and so everything you have said has really resonated with me, and that's very simpatico with my feeling. I have a family. I live in Montana now. I studied with Kongo Roshi, who was also a student of Matsuoka Roshi in Chicago. And so carrying on that tradition in America as an American, and now I live out in Montana, and we have a small group but my interest is helping people learn how to meditate, learn about Zazen, and learn about themselves. And so this is very much a driving force for me as I'm retired and in my 70s.
Are you in Montana now?
What's that?
Montana right now?
Yeah, this is my home, and we're up in my Zendo. It's upstairs in the house, and so people come. We do a lot of things via Zoom as well.
Uh-huh.
So
So not all the folks I see on the screen are in North Carolina?
no, we're all across the country.
We're all across the country.
Oh,
We have
okay.
about 12, I think about a dozen active affiliates around the country and in Nova Scotia, Canada.
Nova Scotia.
Yeah, the Silent Thunder Order is, Mokurai Silent Thunder Order is a network of teachers and students in this tradition, this lineage of the Matsuoka lineage, now coupled with the Uchiyama lineage through Okumura Rōshi. We have a double lineage. We do have Teshin James Smith there, Jim, from Nova Scotia, one of the more senior people who've been around longer than most.
I was just going to ask, based on your feelings toward the trees, are you familiar with a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, written by Robin Kimmerer?
What was the first word?
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Braiding sweetgrass. No.
You would like it.
Okay, I'll put that down.
She's an ecologist, but also First Nations from the western part of New York State.
Oh,
And in her book was recommended to me by my daughter. I think you'll find it really echoes with you.
oh, thank you very much.
I would have something to offer about the way I see Zazen in my life, but I see so many people online that aren't engaging. I would encourage them. Yesterday, Jim Smith gave a talk, and if nobody responded, he started telling bad jokes. Until somebody responded. I don't have any bad jokes. Well, I do actually. But...
I have the list right here, and I will inflict them on you if you wish.
Okay, I'm going to just call them out. Susan Gray, Mojo. Susan, you want to say something? Don't be shy.
I don't know what to say. I had studied with Rinzo type Zen practice. That was all I could find wherever I was. And I read Hojo-san's translation of what was it? It was Practicing the Heart. I can't remember the name of the book, but somebody told me I was raving about it, and somebody in my Sangha in Columbus said, the guy who translated it is in Bloomington, and it's 200 miles across, so I went there, and I had the longest I'd ever sat. I'd sat in a Japanese temple in Columbus, and nobody spoke English, but they were like 40-minute sits. And so when I was talking to one of the priests sitting at Sanshiji, she said, well, it's kind of strenuous, and how long have you ever sat? And I said, well, I did sit for 40 minutes. Well, okay. And when I walked in there, Hojo-san was like, well, if she said it was okay, it's probably, and nobody knew what to make of me. I didn't know what to make of any of that thing. And I had really had, I didn't want to do koans, and I didn't want to be nagged about all that stuff. And I just wanted to sit. And she said, well, this is just sitting. So when you were talking about you shut up, and they said, oh, sure, start the retreat. And so I signed up, and my husband and I went around, and he dropped me off in Bloomington. He said, I'll pick you up in 5 days. And I'm telling you, if I had had my car there, I would have been gone right after that first thing. I was like, whoa, this is really amazing. And I had the most incredible experience, spiritual type experience sitting there. Not just that, but I went back and forth. I went Genzo A retreats, and I went to just the regular sitting retreats, and I went 2 or 3 times a year for about 5 years, and then I finally got the precepts. But I had just amazing. It was like I wasn't trying to do all this mental gymnastics about koans and all this other stuff, and I had all this stuff just kind of open up to me, and I was like, well, this isn't what you're supposed to do, but it sure was powerful. And so I'm not going to tell anybody about it, but this is my practice. So I'm really looking forward to listening to him talk on Sunday. I've seen him one time since then. I went to Bloomington to see a friend of mine receive the precepts there also. But this is going to be a real treat for me.
Wow, I'm sure.
For anyone else, I see Killer Cotton. You're up in Illinois. You're not in Chicago, but you're in Illinois. Do you have anything to ask or say to Daitsū Tom?
Kushin has something in Montana.
Oh, Kushin. We'll get back to you, Joriki.
Sensei, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your life and your Zazen practice with us. I've been very gifted to have Kazuaki Tanahashi as my calligraphy teacher now for a number of years, and he's a great translator also. And I wanted to just mention, I know you're aware of this, but I think we all should just recognize it out loud that your translations of Uchiyama and others have brought Westerners into the conversation of the importance of true Zazen practice. And it could not reach us in any other way. When I read Matsuo Koroshi's own translations speaking to us, that was a stimulus as well. But the translations that are so gifted and so well done give us the essence of what our ancestors in this lineage have done before us and give us inspiration to move forward. So I just want to thank you deeply for what you are leaving all of us as practitioners and yet to be practitioners. It is a deep gift to all of us, and many bows.
Wow. Thank you. No. Wow. Thank you.
Alexandra, we have one in the room. Tango.
I want to thank you for your talk tonight. And you asked how this has affected my practice. My physical health and my neurodiversity as a person, both have affected how I practice in reverse, because Zazen is very difficult for me for many reasons, and yet Zen is easy for me. Just mindfulness and meditation and emptying my mind in different ways that don't have to do with the Zazen. That's becoming more and more of a problem in the range of brain health and in physical health in the world. And I'm going to take my practice into addressing that with neurodiverse groups, physical groups, and aging groups as a writer. And that's what I've gotten from my year of study and practice here in the last year as a resident of the center. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay, Joriki, did you have anything?
Thank you very much. No, I do not. My sitting is not so strong, but I too spend most of my time outside talking to all the little creatures, the plants and the animals, watching the grass grow. But now it has stopped growing. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Are they talking back to you?
Yes, they are. And
And you're in
please,
line
let's think
with-
that the idea, I guess I object to always wanting to put human in front of as an adjective. So it's the universe is consciousness. These plants and animals are filled with consciousness in every possible way.
Beginning to sound a lot like Dogen. Kozan, you're in Chicago. Anything to ask Daitsu?
Yeah, to respond to your question about what we're looking at individually, I'm of an advanced years like some of you folks. And I just remember when I was a kid, young man, religions were something you practiced. You were practicing Lutheran or practicing Catholic or practicing Muslim and all of that. It seems like now that's not necessarily the case. It's more of an identity. I'm a Muslim and you're a Jew, and that becomes an identity rather than something that you put into effect in your life. I think the thing that drew me into Zen practice is that it remains a practice. All the theories and everything else about it that you can get into, and it's exciting to get into all of that. But the bottom line, it's sitting your butt on a cushion and finding something out for yourself to practice, maybe practice to be a human being. I don't know.
Yes. Very good. Yes.
Let's just do a time check. How are we doing on time, Coach?
8:38.
Okay. Okay, I see John Hinman, I see Imo Joe, I see, there we go. Imo, okay. You are it.
Thank you. Sure, I'll give it a whirl. I wanted to echo what Zenku was saying about thanking you for your work in translation. When I think of what it must have been like for my direct ancestors, my teacher, you, Tayun, and you, Tom, how, it must have been so much more difficult when there's a much more of a dearth of materials to learn from as someone who's just starting to practice. And now we just have riches here in the United States. We can go down all sorts of wrong roads if we choose. So I wanted to ask you about, in opening the hand of thought, Uchiyama mentions, studying philosophy and Christianity. Did he ever bring that into his teaching?
Good question. And the answer is definitely yes. When I first arrived at Antaiji to stay there, one of the first things he said to me was, you come from a different tradition. You were raised a Christian. And while you're at Antaiji, I want you to go back and reread the Bible again in the light of your sitting. And in several of his books, Uchiyama Rōshi quotes from the Bible as well, different places. So yes, he didn't become a priest. He didn't become a Catholic priest. And he talks about that in one of his books as well. But the influence was definitely there. Also, he wasn't a philosopher. He didn't philosophize, and he never used philosophical terms. He didn't use Buddhist terms for the most part, unless he was explaining some Buddhist term. And he said he did that because there were too many priests who were simply mouthing Buddhist terms without explaining what they meant. So yes, returning to your question about Christianity, yes, he did tell me to look again, in the light of your own sitting practice.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating to hear.
That's an interesting point about the Buddhist terms, that we're doing a kind of a project. Several of us are doing what we call paraphrase. We're paraphrasing the teaching in modern idiom and de-jargonizing it as completely as we can, trying to say what the teaching seems to be saying without any of the jargon terms, without any of those kinds of references. So we've done several different pieces. It's kind of an interesting project effort.
Very good.
It occurred to me you've avoided a little bit the political issues of the time, which I understand why. But it seems to me it's one of the answers to your question about where the practice lives today. And it seems to me that what we're witnessing is an inability to embrace aging, sickness, death, and writ large. And that's what's driving a lot of the fear and paranoia and psychosis that we see in our so-called political system. An inability to embrace the teachings of Buddhism. Of course, in Zen, Zazen is the way we try to embrace them, the method.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. I try to stay away from making remarks about politics. I guess perhaps when I was first at Antaiji, for example, Uchiyama Rōshi often asked me about my time with Reverend King and about those days. And he was very interested in knowing more about what was going on in American society. He wanted to know those things, but our practice has to be going, not making that the central focus of our life. The politics, not making politics the focus of our life, but rather that our sitting, as it goes out into the community, is one of serving the community.
Yes, yes. It certainly puts politics in perspective.
Yes, yes.
So I know you're on an earlier time zone than we are. I'm a little concerned about taking too much of your time. Do you think is there anything else you would like to discuss? We really appreciate this. We'll send you a small honorarium. How's it?
No.
We'll send you a pineapple.
Oh, what's in my pineapple are the wild pigs. The wild pigs took one of my favorite pineapples this morning. And that boar has been digging on my lawn for the last month now, and I've been rather upset about him. I do have wild chickens that I feed on a daily basis, and Mr. Pig thinks that when I feed the chickens, it's time to feed him too.
Right.
And we have quite a big, actually, we have quite a big problem with ungulates here, yeah, particularly on Hawaii Island. It's a huge problem. As I suppose you could say, as a Buddhist priest, I questioned whether it was okay to have a pig trap on my property, and I have captured a couple of pigs that way, and friends that I know how to do the whole bit took care of those pigs for me. But
So it's one reputation is that Buddha died of tainted pork. You may have heard this story.
yes, yes.
So I'm going to go one more time to the gallery, peanut gallery, and see if anybody, John Hinman, anybody else, Kotsu-san, anybody wants to come forth, hasn't come forth. Kotsu-san. Soon we'll do our closing chant.
Everyone, good evening, senseis. Thank you for sharing your life stories. Sensei, it's fascinating. I wasn't born in 1969, in case you were wondering, but you ask, what Zazen has brought into your life. In my case, I would say balance. Balance is hard to find, easy to lose, and we're lay practitioners. We some of us have a job, or we had a job, a family, a spouse, kids. Finding balance around that can be difficult, but Zazen has really helped me with that. Again, thank you very much. Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.
Okay, I would add that Zazen, compared to all other philosophies and religions, and I don't think Zen can become your religion, I think. Zazen is our saving grace. It's our method. It's a technique. It's a method we can use. That's what I first liked about Zen when I first met Matsuoka Roshi. There's something to do. It's not just listening, thinking, philosophizing. Something to do, and it works.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with that, Tom, any closing comments you'd like to make, and then we'll do our chant. We'll invite you to, we've run a little bit over, we'll invite you to chant the Tisarana with us after we do the 4 vows.
I would just say one thing, and that is, for me, Okumura Shōhaku Rōshi, whom you all know quite well, is for me undoubtedly one of the finest, if not the finest, Buddhist scholar in the United States today. You have a teacher there who is, for me, just incredible.
Yeah. When I first met him, I told him I thought he was the reincarnation of Dogen.
Yeah. Yes. Good point.
So let's join in the 4 great vows, and we'll stop recording and join the 4 great vows. We'll do it without the bells so that we don't have that issue. And we would like to just, after that, we